Test 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, councillors. Can I ask you to please take your seats? It's 6 p.m. Let's make a start. Thank you, councillors. Good evening. It's 6 p.m. on the 27th of January 2021, and I'd like you to welcome you all to our special council meeting of this evening. At item 1, I'd like to declare the meeting open, as I've just done, and acknowledge the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land. We also, of course, pay our respects to elders, both past and present. May I ask everyone present, please, to turn off your electronic devices, mobile phones, iPads and tablets for the duration of this meeting. Tonight's council meeting is being recorded, and a copy of the audio recording will be available on the city's website within 72 hours of the meeting. The remainder of the disclaimer can be seen on screen. And I'll just take a moment just to welcome Stephen Kane, Director Stephen Kane, to the panel this evening. He's joining us for the first time. So welcome, Mr. Kane. At item 2, attendance, apologies. At item 2.1, there are no apologies for this evening. We have the full council here. Thank you, councillors. Approved leave of absence. There has been no approved leave of absence. Disclosures of interest. Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Mayor. There have been no disclosures of interest submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. That being the case, we'll move on to question time for the public. I now open public question time at 6:02 p.m. This time set aside, as always, is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. For recording purposes, please state your name and address and then proceed to ask your question. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy AD02, members of the public who have registered with the city's administration shall be called on in the order in which registrations were received. Written questions will precede verbal questions. The city has the city received questions for this evening? We haven't. We've received no questions. Any questions from the public gallery before we move on? Thank you. We will close public question time now at 6:03 p.m. We'll move on to the receiving of petitions, presentations and deputations. At item 5.1, petitions, there are none being received tonight. At item 5.2, at presentations, there are no presentations this evening. At item 5.3, deputations, we do have a deputation which has been approved by for Urban Proprietary Limited. That's in regards to item number SD002 of 21. The title of that item being the recommendation to the Western Australian Planning Commission on the proposed Ranford Road train station at lots 303 and 500 Ranford Road and lot 302 Johnston Road in Canning Vale. I understand we have Mr. Harron here. Thank you. Welcome. Can I ask you just to step forward, introduce yourself to the council and go ahead with your deputation. You have a maximum of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ray Herron. I'm from Urbis and we are working for the Metronet Alliance and was hoping to obviously present to you in relation to the item here today. I'll just put that up a little bit further. There's just a few items that we're wanting to talk through. If I could just get the first slide, please. In terms of placing this particular proposal in context, the Ranford Road station is an important part of the Thornley to Coburn link, which is part of the broader state government Metronet initiative, which is delivering under this particular contract at least the Thornley to Coburn link and the Yanchep extension. As you'd appreciate, there is a significant amount of work and complexity attached to this, and we're just wanting to run through some of those items here today. If I could get the next slide, please. As I mentioned, it is part of the broader Metronet project, and the New West Alliance, which was appointed as the contractor for this particular works, has been appointed with a number of elements which have been fixed and budgets fixed through the Parliament. Obviously, that's part of the process for major capital works. It's an important part of an improvement that will not only significantly benefit residents within the City of Canning, but also within the broader metropolitan region. It needs to be understood, and as a former Director of Planning at your adjoining City of Gosnells, it needs to be acknowledged obviously that there was a missing link in the public transport network, and this is an important part of addressing that. The New West Alliance was appointed to develop the project working with a broad range of stakeholders, and I would like to personally thank, but also on behalf of the Alliance, the staff at the City of Canning who have been very cooperative during this process, in which we've been trying to work through a range of details. If I could get the next slide, please. I'm sure the councillors would be aware of the particular site, but for clarity, the planning control area is shown on the plan above. By being a planning control area, this area is the subject to approvals under the Metropolitan Region Scheme, which means the WA Planning Commission is determining this particular application. That being said, we acknowledge the importance of the City of Canning, both as an existing landowner, as an operator of the existing waste facility adjoining the site, and therefore we have been engaging with the City of Canning through that process. That resulted in a development application which was lodged simultaneously with the WA Planning Commission and the City of Canning. If I can get the next plan, please. And although I'm not going to try to cover off all details this evening, given the comprehensive report provided by your staff, just to cover off a few key points, this has been a designated park and ride station. As you would appreciate, given a number of elements associated with the context here, the notion of doing a transit-oriented development was simply not feasible. We have a range of issues attached to, I suppose, the constraints of existing infrastructure. There's also obviously a former landfill site which has particular physical constraints attached to it. There's also Bush Forever sites and various other elements which have had to, I suppose, deliver or inform the design of the station. That being said, there has been a lot of consideration in making sure that what is delivered is both attractive and functional. I have, through the previous few months, learnt an incredible amount of how train stations operate. I had no idea. I just thought it involved a train and passengers, but apparently it's a lot more than that. There are still some issues that are being worked through, and there is still a lot of negotiations underway. However, we do feel that what has been able to be delivered, we have taken on board a number of items of feedback from the city, made a number of modifications, and we feel that what is represented is a good balanced outcome. Next slide, please. This is an artist's impression, which is always applied with caution. I did particularly tell the architects to make sure there was no people holding balloons or dogs, which tend to be their go-to proposition. But the notion here, and what we're wanting to basically demonstrate, is the key configurations of the elements. And there are, as I understand it, more detailed plans that have been available to councillors previously. The key thing to highlight is there's the station entry component, which the next slide will show in a closer up image. Then there's an overhead, an overpass through to a central platform, which will be the key area where passengers obviously embark on their journey. That will have both stairs and lifts, so it will be universal access and meet those universal access requirements. There is a range of landscaping that is proposed, but we are working through issues around species, etc. Because it's former landfill, if you have anything that's too deep-rooted, it's going to tap into things which is ultimately going to kill the vegetation. So getting the balance right has been key. The other thing is that we also need to meet requirements around bushfire protection and safety and security, so there's been a lot of attention being paid to that. The bus interchange which adjoins Ranford Road is another key element. There is also a drop-off and pick-up area for park and ride passengers, for the kiss and ride passengers, and then obviously a 400-bay car park, which will be for the park and ride passengers. If I can get the next image, please. So this is the station entry point. This does not show the public art elements. The public artist has now been engaged as part of the broader Metronet program, it was felt that it was important that the public art at each of the stations have an interrelationship rather than being things that are sort of stuck on buildings at each individual site. This was the theme for this particular station is about a meeting point, and that will be fed through as part of that public art component. If I could get, oh, actually I think that is the last slide. So we acknowledge that there are details, particularly around items on drainage and access, which are still being worked through and negotiated. We are hopeful that they can be worked through. We are ultimately very pleased that the officer report covers off on the issues that we have discussed. The only items that we do feel that, and as I sort of say, we respect the city's position and the officers are doing the best thing in terms of representing the city. We have raised some issues in relation to some of those changes, which will obviously then be part of a determination from the Commission. That relates in particular to the issue of access and whether how the access arrangements are worked, particularly because the design development of the Jandakot East Link Road is still in a formative stage, and that's still a bit of a toing and froing, but we are comfortable and confident that that will be resolved before construction of that particular element proceeds. And I am, along with Tor Thardworth from the New West Alliance, happy to answer any questions.
I thank you, and I'll allow it. Councillor Holland.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a couple, nothing serious. I read the large attachment report. I was a bit concerned where it said that there would be no conceivable or seeable really noise concerns there. I can't quite see how that is where it was said in there that we're going in the report itself. I mean, you're going to have trains going in and out, in and out. I was wondering how you're going to mitigate that, because the trains that go in Canning Vale now, the freight trains, mainly, and if your house is near there, and I saw you've got the 3 areas, I think it was 3 areas, wasn't there, whether they were within 400, 600 and 300 metres or something like that. But the ones in Canning Vale, yeah, the noise is quite horrendous. So how are you going to mitigate that?
I'm happy to address that, and then perhaps Tor can add to that. When we were talking about that, it was about the station specifically. Most of the noise issues through Canning Vale is actually at the moment with existing issues with the freight rail, which is currently exempt. As part of this particular project, noise walls are being delivered, which will not only address the issues around the passenger rail, but will in fact far improve the situation on the existing freight rail. So what we've been able to show as part of our modelling of the system overall is that there is an overall improvement, because, as I mentioned, the freight rail is in fact a far noisier mechanism than what the passenger rail will be. In terms of the movement from the station is actually quite distant from the nearest residence. So and given the sunken nature of its location, it is not currently based on the standards that exist, there is no identified issues in terms of requiring noise walls in that particular vicinity. But further up, where the line will be much closer to residential premises, there will be noise walls constructed as part of the proposal.
Just for the sake of the recording, if you're about to speak, would you mind just introducing yourself? Thank you.
My name is Tor Farnworth. I work for the New West Alliance, and like Ray, I've been a town planner for some time, but I've been put on this task to act as the interface manager and to be that go-between and assisting the project to understand its obligations. To answer your question, Ray's given you 95% of the answer, and that's excellent. So we operate in accordance with state planning policy for transport corridors. Wherever we have existing development, we're obliged to put noise walls in, and a lot of detail is going into noise modelling of that. Where there is no or greenfield, it's not really a worry for the Thornley Coburn Link, but for the Yanchep Rail extension, that's an obligation for the developers to provide the noise walls, but you're getting noise walls. The other thing I would like to raise for you is that with the Thornley Coburn Link, we have to effectively reconstruct 8 lines. We have the up and down for the passengers, and we also have arc infrastructures as well. Sorry, that's 4 lines. And consequently, we have to literally relay 4 lines. All 4 lines will also get ballast matting. So right now you have raw rail lines sitting on sand, and that gives you that greatest contribution of not noise necessarily, but vibration. That's that long range effect you're going to get. Yeah, so with ballast matting, essentially we cushion every train movement, be it freight rail or domestic rail, we cushion out that vibration. I can't tell you right now what the exact percentage is, but my understanding is that the experience you get today with ARC infrastructure rolling down there with its diesels, you won't even hear the passenger line. You couldn't even hear it. So the only real noise you're going to get is the diesel engines, and if that is the case, you still will get a noise wall that you don't have now.
Thank you. Councillor Holland, you've got another question? And then Councillor Sweeney.
You've got a couple. The noise wall, will that go on at the back of where all those establishments are there? What do they know? Waratah,
Yes, it will.
Livingston and those
It will
sort of things.
adjoin where residential development, it doesn't have to, so where the industrial development adjoins, it's obviously not required, but
Yeah.
where it adjoins residential, it will be provided.
And there's enough room there to put the extra tracks on there, is there?
Yeah, it's,
Where the current freight rail is.
the reserve does require a little bit of expansion in certain localities, and also what you see, the cut right now isn't actually the full extent of the reserve, so you're going to see us do quite a lot of work further up the line for the Canning side, more into the Gosnells area. We'll be widening it, but it's still within the Railways Reserve under the Metropolitan Region Scheme.
The other parts I was going to make, I understood completely why you're not doing the TOD there. It's just not, it's not appropriate, not feasible. There was an access road that was coming in, I think, and it had something to do with the Jandakot East Link, where it was only going to be one lane, and it was already in the report saying that they can see that the one lane will not be enough. Why aren't we doing 2 lanes now?
So, and that's actually been taken on board, so we're not objecting to that condition, and we agree with that change occurring to enable the second left turn lane. We do understand that that's not going to be required for some 10 years, but it will be provided for in the placement of the works as it stands. The issue, as we understand it, and in talking with Troy just this morning, is that although 2 lanes from a traffic mapping perspective, once you have 2 lanes turning, you have to have a light for turning traffic. If you have a single lane, you have a give way, which actually allows more free movement. Yeah. So, which is why it's not appropriate to put in up front, because it would actually create a worse situation than having the single lane give way.
Okay. The last question is, and I'll let everyone have a go after that, sorry. You've got a 400 bay car park there with 6 specialised bays, or whatever you call it, I can't remember the exact terminology, and 2 recharging bays. The 6, I gather that's handicap bays, is it? Is that what they are?
Well, yes, I think they're referred to as universal access bays or the like.
Or whatever,
Yeah,
excuse my ignorance. But
yeah.
why so little? Why so few?
Well, that's in accordance, again, that those standards are set under the ACROD standards, and the number of bays is as a precaution, and that is the number of bays required. There are, however, additional bays which are actually included in the kiss and ride area. So there are some bays there which are, if you like, allowed for longer term use for people who have, I suppose, access limitations. So in fact, there's another 3 bays that are located up there, but it all is to Australian standards.
What about the 2 charging bays? Only 2. We're all trying to go more and more electric, or
Well,
whatever you want to call them, when they're going to put 2 in.
I would be happy to be quite explicit that there is provision for 2. At the moment, there is no way in which you could actually provide for those sorts of bays within a public car park setting. How you would allocate those, how you would actually get a fee for the actual charging of it. There's not, in fact, universal connection points that could be applied. There is a range of serviceability issues that we have no doubt will be resolved as technology moves on. So we have made provision. At the end of the day, multiple bays could be provided if and when there is demand, but designating them, you could imagine someone who's just walked 150 metres who then walks past a Tesla who gets priority parking might not go down too well at this particular point in time.
Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a few questions. The first one, I'll keep you going with the acoustic measures that we just spoke about there on Ranford Road, which is probably going to intersect Waratah Estate, where the housing estates are. Is that going to be, is that an acoustic wall? Is that the sort of thing that we're talking about as far as the noise measures? Yep, okay. And is that going to extend to the northern side where the markets are on that side there, not on the market side, but on the other side, facing the markets on the railway line, that would protect that side of Caledonia Estate as well, along that side?
Caledonia Estate. Sorry, I'm just having to remember, because, and again, so to be, my understanding is that there was modelling done across the entire length. Anywhere where there is adjoining residential development, noise walls are being installed as part of the works that are being undertaken. In terms of the specifics, I'm happy to perhaps contact you offline and run through that. It doesn't actually form part of the approval because these are all exempt works under the public infrastructure requirements, because, you know, they're higher than is required. But all the requirements, as you would see in any recent infrastructure works where they have the panelling above, which is actually see-through to make sure that natural light is still able to move through while still providing noise protection, all those measures will be up to equal, if not better, than anything that's been delivered to date.
If I may just add, just to help with that, the reason, so it's not part of the DA, as Ray says, separate sets of legislation, but the New West Alliance is obliged under the scope of works and technical criteria to do exactly that in accordance with state planning policy. But the reason why we haven't got a very detailed presentation on noise walls, which we will do with you, is we actually want to work with that community on what the treatments are. So the height of the wall, we only want to take as high as the modelling shows you have to go. And we're talking 2.4 metres or higher anyway. Yeah. But the actual colouring, the textures, we want to work with that community to make sure it works for them in their locality too.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Sorry. Yeah, I've got a few more questions. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, that's fine. That's okay. I'm actually the council for Canning Vale. I'm from the Nicholson ward, so I'll be fielding quite a few questions and have already in regards to some things that I'm asking. The second point that I'd like to make, or the second question I'd like to make, is about the traffic on Ranford Road. Since the project commenced, which was at the beginning of last year, I guess it's been problematic. The changes to the road systems there, possibly even disastrous, really, as far as the volume of traffic that uses that major arterial road every day. It's the main corridor to the southwest. Thousands of cars use that to and from every day. It remains problematic. It remains dangerous. Both not just during the day but also at night time as well. There has been some lighting installed, portable lighting on trailers installed, but I live very close to there and see this area daily. Sometimes that lighting works and sometimes, more often than not...
I just have to ask you to ask your question, Councillor. Yeah.
I'm getting round to it, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor, I'll just ask you to ask your question and then we need to move on. It's not a workshop, so please ask your question and then we need to move on.
So the question is in regards to that traffic and whether or not are the existing measures going to be improved moving forward in relation to this project, because it's going to be going on for some time.
Certainly, and I'm going to happily pass this to Tor in a moment because, again, outside of our particular scope, but I think the key thing to note here is that obviously any public works do have an interruption phase. There's accepted. In this particular instance where the bridge is having to be reconstructed, that reconstruction is to widen and provide for additional lanes. So the ultimate outcome will be substantially improved. In terms of this or other items relating to the construction staging, there is a team of engagement people who perhaps Tor can liaise with you on.
Yeah. I just add, look, I absolutely, I worked with Troy before when I worked for the City of Canning, so he can have very robust conversations about whether or not we're performing well enough. I'll concede a couple of things like the traffic, the lighting isn't working. I've made some notes and I'm carrying it back. The traffic management plan for that site is not up to date. It needs to be updated to reflect some augmentations. It also needs to, because we are expanding, as Ray said, we're expanding over an old fill site. So we need to do some ground improvements. We need to do some contaminated sites works. That detail we need to come forward and show. And in that, we call that stage 2B. In that, we have a comprehensive update to the traffic management plan coming. So that's the thing, is that past this DA, we still have an obligation as you as the road authority to keep you happy. So that relationship won't be finished after this DA. We've got a lot more to do. And because that man there is experienced and knows how to write a traffic management plan, we will have to update, get approval from this council to that traffic management planning going forward, and we're not off the hook on that.
Yeah, thanks very much. And Mr Mayor, I am aware of the timings, but I think it's important that I just have an opportunity to give you some of that feedback. And finally, my last question, the final question I have is just in relation to the roadway as well, that's occurring at the moment. There's a great number of pedestrians from Caledonia Estate use or cross over that roadway back and forth both morning and night. And at the moment, it's extremely difficult, extremely dangerous trying to negotiate 6 lanes of traffic. I was just wondering, is there anything you can tell me, any feedback you can tell me in relation to some of the strategic measures or improvements you are thinking about that from this point forward as well, that I could take back to the residents?
I would suggest that we would need to speak to the traffic engineers who are obviously aware of the details. So if we can take that on notice and come back to you,
Yep, that's fine.
Happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
There's a lot of tie-in work we've got
Thanks
to do.
very much. Yeah,
And
Councillor
yes,
Barry.
Caledonia gets walls.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, just a quick question, and we'll stay on the noise. So I'm under the impression that there will be no road rail intersection, so it'll go under the bridge. Now, the bane of everybody on every railway line is the horns of the train. Those noise walls you're talking about at 2.4, are they going to ameliorate that noise to the extent that nobody will hear it, and given the fact that it's going to be a busy line, busy as Armidale line, so
Certainly, and
we have to put up with it, or is it going to do the trick?
well, I think as with any piece of infrastructure, could I say that it has no impact? I couldn't tell you that. What I can say is that all the requirements are going to be within standard. Because you don't have level crossings, you don't have the requirements for the horns, which tend to be the big thing on the Armidale line, as someone who knows it well. So you don't have the same level of issue. Adjoining the station, again, there isn't actually residences which are right abutting the station, which will reduce any potential impact. Again, all I can say is that based on the information provided by through the technical reports, is that the situation will be improved on the current. So it will be a better situation and less noise impact than what residents suffer at the moment.
So does that, am I to understand then that that's to the extent of no crossing blowing the horn, but to the best of your knowledge is when they come into the station and leave the station, the tooting of the horn a safety issue which will carry on?
Good point. It's not common practice for the PTA to use the horns unless in an emergency. They'll use a PA system for most things. The practices of ARC Infrastructure is to sound that horn presently because it's uncontrolled. We are now going to control access to that rail reserve, so there will be less reason for any driver to push that button. And to pick up that point, though, really importantly about the station, a condition of the development approval will require us to do a follow-up detailed acoustic assessment of what the machinery, plant, PAs, practices, control measures, alarms, everything the station would do in a 24-hour cycle. We owe that as a condition for the city, a noise acoustic assessment of the station building's operations. The rolling stock behaviour is only just an emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along this evening. You're obviously welcome to stay. The item will be dealt with a little later in the meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We move on to item 6, councillors. Thank you for your questions. The first one is a report from the Office of the CEO. It's OC 003 of 21. The title of the report is South East Corridor Councils Alliance Memorandum of Understanding. The officer's recommendation is about to go on the screen. It is now on the screen and is also on page 4 of tonight's agenda. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you. Deputy Mayor will be the mover and Councillor Holland will be the seconder. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I support this motion. I know that it's important to get into groups. I know a lot of councils have done groupings. This grouping does make sense. So I look forward to, we've had a number of events with them already, Armidale, Canning, Gosnells, Victoria Park. It looks good to me, and I hope that it can meet its objectives that are listed in 4, from advocacy all the way down to heritage and culture. So I support this, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I support the motion. I think it's a great initiative. I know you and the CEO have been doing a lot of work in this area, so I won't go on. I support the motion.
Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to speak against it? Councillor Ponaturo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not speaking against, just a quick question on this. So is it something going to be like a consortium setup, even though it's financially we are not involved?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by consortium.
Normally, on a capex projects or something, if you're doing a drilling campaign or something, then you get together 4 companies and then you pull it out and do it. So that's my question: is it a consortium setup?
I'll ask the CEO just to answer that question. Thank you, Councillor Ponaturo.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. No, this is just at this stage a voluntary alliance of member councils. If, however, in the future it is deemed to add to the advantage of the group, then they may seek to become an incorporated group and for the purposes of receiving funds and things like that. But it's premature at this stage to think of that. We need to give it a bit of a go for the next few months to see how the alliance works, and then it may evolve to something else.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Porter? Oh, sorry, I'll come back to you, Councillor Ponaturo. Follow up?
Yeah, just quick. So do you have any particular specific project or anything planned up so for us to look forward in the next few months, or do we know anything? Thank you.
CEO, did you want to address that?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. There are a number of ideas that have been submitted to the group so far. There have been some correspondence prior to this that have been sent to ministers around the issue of homelessness. There are some ideas around tourism, as well as potentially any resource sharing that may take place between the members of the Alliance. But nothing's firmed up just yet. We are in that storming stage, and this is the beginning of the formation of groups. So over the next few weeks, we hope to have a plan of sorts that the alliance of the SECA mayors could consider, and then ultimately we will see where we go from there.
Councillor?
So what form of, so this is the mayors and the CEOs going to be involved in part of this MOU. So what form of communication or communication strategy have you thought about to the rest of the councillors? Because every council has got a number of councillors. Obviously, we are quite eager to know what's happening around our area. So what's the communication strategy, I think? Thank you.
I think it's CEO, it's in the report, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Again, good question. The communication between the SECA members and the elected members of their respective councils has been recognised as an important thing to resolve early on in the formation of the group. We haven't formalised the communication on that at this stage. The intention is for the mayors and the CEOs to communicate back to the broader council, and that may take the form of a report to council, or it may take the form of a memorandum sent to councillors by way of email or such things. But it's early days at this stage. Like I said, we're still in that forming stage. And I know at the most recent meeting of the CEOs that I convened last week, the issue of reporting back to elected members was the top of our agenda, and each CEO is going to be working up some proposals on how that will happen. We're not new to this area. The Southeast Alliance Southwest Alliance has been in a incorporated form for some time, and they've established obviously some very good communication methods. There is a grouping of inner city councils, mayors and CEOs, and they're also been regularly communicating with their respective councils. So we'll learn from other people, and we will apply that learning to what we come up with.
Thank you. One last question. So do we get any input in part of any of this process of going forward as a councillors, or is just a purely it stays within the?
I think I can answer that. Look, we're always happy to hear any ideas. I mean, if somebody would like an item considered for an agenda item, no problem at all. I mean, my belief is that we'll be sharing minutes and keeping everybody informed. But it's not dissimilar, as the CEO said. There's a number of groups that he has named, and there's others. I think Stirling, Wanneroo, and Joondalup work very closely together in very similar vein, CEOs and mayors. So it's a matter of us just talking at that level, but also advocating. So things like the elevated rail line that will affect in time right through from the Causeway at Victoria Park all the way through to Armidale. It's an opportunity for us to actually get together. There seems to be a little bit more, we will get more people listening to us probably as a group of senior people to speak collectively on behalf of our communities rather than to do that in isolation. So as the CEO said, I think, so we'll be looking at learning from others, working out where we go from this. It's already been unanimously adopted by 2 other councils and yet to go to GOZIs, and once this is bedded down, we'll flesh all that out. But my belief is we'll be keeping everybody fully informed of everything that happens, and we'll be just undertaking the meetings, that's all. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Porter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I've just got a quick question. Will this alliance be a good place to try and convince Gosnells to allow the extension of Sevenoaks onto, Albany Highway? Thank you.
CEO?
Yeah, good try, councillor. I suspect this won't be the forum where we'll reach agreement on that unless I take Mr. Cowie out to the car park and we have a bit of a brawl. No, I don't think it's going to be used that way.
Councillors, unless there's anybody wishing to speak against it, can I? Oh, okay. Councillor Barry first and then Councillor Kunza.
Thanks for the affirmation, Mr. Mayor. Just as well, I suppose the other question is, and following on from Councillor Porter's, I mean, Gosnells and Vic Park, probably either end of the Sevenoaks. Couple of questions, because we obviously haven't had a agenda briefing or anything on this. So this MOU, does this just basically make SEQA a legal entity to lobby the government for whatever purposes?
I think I'd just answer that. It's not a legal entity. It's just a memorandum of understanding which doesn't bind any of the parties to really do anything. It just means that we've got an understanding, basically a gentleman's agreement or gentleman and ladies agreement, that we will work collaboratively together where we can and try and find ways that we can do all the things that we're hoping to do, like reducing red tape and bureaucracy and all those sorts of things that we're all hopeful for. But yeah, it's not a legal entity, so we can withdraw at any time. Anyone else can withdraw at any time. It doesn't stop us from working in isolation. We don't have to agree with each other. We've got very different view, for instance, on the elevated rail to Victoria Park, and that's in the public record. So we're not bolted onto each other, but it's a real opportunity for us just to talk at that level and work collaboratively where we can.
So we don't, in what you're saying then is we don't really need the MOU. I mean, do we need it to lobby the government? That's what I'm saying. Is it to make it a legal entity?
It formalises the process, but it's not a legal entity, if I can make that...
Okay, so the other question then is, will this council be required to delegate any level of authority to yourself and the CEO in relation to any decisions that you may discuss and make in this
CEO?
second?
No, that's not the case.
Definitely not?
Councillor, no. There's no request to delegate. I mean, this, as the Mayor has explained, it is a group the purpose is to speak with one voice on issues to do with the region as best we can. But there will be no decisions taken at that forum that will necessitate any action that would require councils to commit to anything unless the matter is agreed to by the respective councils. So, there's no delegation, councillor.
So there'll be no requirement for us to either us or them to align their policies with ours or us with them. It's just a bit of the talk as usual.
100%. It's not a decision-making forum, honestly, and it's on the public record. If we're required to make a decision, we will bring it back to council for endorsement. And as I said, we can break ranks. We don't have to agree. It just means that we're going to. It is, Graham, getting to your point. It really is just an opportunity for us to get around a table, have a sandwich and a coffee, and have a talk about things that affect us all. And I think it kind of started some time ago. When we realised the difficulties of working in isolation. You'll remember a couple of years ago we had a very big, fairly expensive event out here that we didn't have a very good turnout, and none of us knew at the time. We were wondering why the turnout was so low, and there was the biggest event of the year is held on exactly the same day in the city of Gosnells. And because we work in isolation, no one really knew. So we're just looking at ways that we can kind of talk to each other and make sure that we are getting the maximum benefit for our communities.
I understand that, but I hope the benefits are greater than that. But just one other one, confidentially, it says SEC will determine what information is to be dealt with confidentially by the parties. Will we all, and this is probably further to Councillor Ponaturo's question, will we all be informed confidential items as well?
I think I can say quite categorically yes. This is not a secret forum. It'll be entirely above board. So nothing will be hidden in the shadows. Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing further to add to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kunza. My apologies.
Thank you. Yeah, I just have some questions / comments regarding 3.3, the objectives. Just with respect to the objective for transport, all the objectives quite relate to the Southeast Corridor and what we want to do, or what we like. The purpose of this group is to advocate as a Southeast Corridor, but transport doesn't seem to meet any strategic objectives for the Southeast Corridor. I'm just wondering why we focus on job creation or private investment and not looking at the strategic aims of the Southeast Corridor.
I think it's written intentionally as a high-level document, devoid of great detail, but I might get the CEO just to comment on that specifically.
I think that given that this is an MOU that talks about the Southeast Corridor councils, it does relate to the Southeast Corridor. It doesn't say that it relates to the Southeast Corridor, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve the transport outcomes for this corridor. We can't be advocating for the Northwest or any other corridor as a council. So it probably goes without saying, given the MOU relates to all of us.
I guess my point with all the other ones, they do talk about the Southeast Corridor, and I guess what I'm getting at is it doesn't talk about long forgotten transport links or congestion issues. It doesn't talk about transport related things. It talks about job creation and private investment, whereas all the other subheadings have comments or statements that relate to the Southeast Corridor and what objective in the area they want to, I guess from a tourism perspective, we want to promote the corridor's tourism assets. I guess when I read transport, I don't see anything, given that one of the biggest issues in the Southeast Corridor is the strategic links and the lack of investment in dealing with congestion on Albany Highway. I guess when I read it, I just didn't understand why it wasn't focusing on that. That was just a comment. From the advocacy perspective, I preface these comments by saying that the city does a fantastic job compared to what it did a few years ago in terms of advocacy, and I think that's illustrated by the amount of grant funding we've got in the last 12-24 months. Just one thing we don't do is, I guess, focus on election cycles, and I just think it's a bit funny endorsing a position on election cycles for the Southeast Corridor when it's not an area that I think I believe it's an area that we could focus on ourselves.
Yeah, I'll take your comment. Yeah, good point. Councillor Barry.
Just one more. I mean, the question is, I think I went to a meeting with the CEO, the other group that we're aligned with. Is that an MOU, the one with Shire Swan, etc.? This won't impinge on any way on that? So we're just sharing ourselves around.
CEO.
Just to clarify, Councillor, are you referring to the City Deals agreement that we did with Belmont, the group of councillors around that? Yeah, no, it won't. It has no bearing on that, although Victoria Park and Canning were invited to be co-signatories to that MOU for the purposes of putting a united City Deals proposal to the federal government. That's got nowhere, by the way, but it has no impact on what we're doing in the corridor. No, we don't. We agreed to our council's being a party to that City Deals proposal. So I don't think it's an MOU. It may have been just an exchange of letters. I can't remember precisely.
Thank you, councillors. Unless there's anybody wishing to speak against it, I'd like to put the matter to the vote. No, I've got no one speaking against it, so there's no reason for the Deputy Mayor to close. If you're okay with that, Deputy Mayor, we'll put the matter to the vote. Thank you, councillors.
Motion OC 003-21 South East Corridor Councils Alliance MOU has been passed unanimously.
Thank you, councillors. We move on to SD 004 of 21. The responsible officer is the Director of Canning Development. The title of the report is the recommendation to the Western Australian Planning Commission on the proposed Ranford Road train station at lots 303 and 500 Ranford Road and lot 302 Johnston Road in Canning Vale. The officer's comprehensive recommendation is on the screen, or part of it is, and also obviously contained in tonight's report, page 15 of the agenda for tonight's report. Can I have a mover for that item, please? Councillor Sabiri. Thank you, Councillor Sabiri. And a seconder? Councillor Holland. Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Sabiri.
Yep, I support the officer's recommendation and the amount of work they put into it, considering this is one of the first planning items that's going through this process that's coming to us, and I'm happy with the recommendation, especially I guess the recommendation around recommendation 6, which goes into detail about the drainage basin and the Bush Forever site in that area. So I look forward to working with that group and seeing a good outcome with drainage and those kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Sabiri, I had that asterisk as well. That one. Just before I speak, I've got a question on number 27.
Yeah, go ahead.
Any damage? I'm just thinking that I'm not understanding this. Any damage or removal of vegetation located outside the development area that does not form part of the permanent infrastructure and includes shall be replaced or repaired at the cost of the landowner applicant. Who's that?
Director Bright, can I ask you to comment on that, or would you like Troy to come on it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, certainly this is a standard condition that's been put on all the train station approvals. This is I think it's the second last station approval that's going to the West Australian Planning Commission. Standard condition. So what it's saying is the owner or the proponent of the development, Metronet, would need to ensure that if they damage any vegetation that's not identified to be permanently removed, so it's outside the development area, they must rehabilitate that area.
I understood that part. I just didn't understand who the landowner applicant was, and you cleared that up. Thank you, Director. A last question. I mean, it's taken a bit of Bush Forever. I couldn't find out where exactly going through this little document here of 294,000 pages, where it said how much is going to be recompensated. I understood if we took some Bush Forever from here, we had to put it somewhere else or something like that. Offset it, that's the word, thank you. Are we doing that to the...
Director Bright, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, certainly there has been already an environmental approval issued for this particular project, so that has identified those offset requirements and the amount of vegetation that will be offset in response to what's being cleared as part of this development. So that's already gone through its own environmental process being completed.
That's not why, that's why it's not in the environmental part that's in here.
Yes, it has gone through its own previous environmental assessment process, which has been approved.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Councillor,
Mr.
do you
Mayor.
want
Yes, I support this. I think it's a, it's gone progress so far now. We've really got to support it, but I think it's going to be a great thing, the Metronet thing coming out here, another train station out there. It's a good idea. I won't go on about it, Mr. Mayor, I'll just say that I support it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor. Look, I'll just say the same. I unequivocally supported what a wonderful investment by the state government in the city of Canning, and I think that's a credit to this council that we have worked so collaboratively over a period of time. I echo the sentiment of Councillor Kunze earlier about the escalation in investment in this city, and I think that's a credit, as I said, to this council and the willingness of the executive to work with the state government where we can. To find significant benefits for our community, and I'm really pleased that this is happening in Canning Vale. It's wonderful for those for that community specifically, and there are so many benefits along that line. Nicholson Road in the city of Gosnells is another a station, but I like the fact also, apart from anything else, it's going to provide much needed public transport into the Canning Vale industrial area, on the periphery of it anyway, which has been sadly lacking for a long time. And I'm also really pleased to see the number of conditions that are in here which provide some controls over what will occur going forward. Anybody else got anything to say? Councillor Sweeney, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I speak also in favour of the motion. I've just got a comment or a question, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Sweeney.
Just in, and this relates really in relation to a couple of things that I've been involved with in the last week, and it's to do with the traffic management plan, and I think it's on page 18 in relation to condition 3. It talks about noise, but I'm talking about mainly here is the communications, and for most of the time 99% of Canning Vale are largely unaffected day and night by the works that are carried out on Ranford Road. But more recently, in the last couple of weeks, there has been some works carried out on Ranford Road that has caused a lot of grief to probably about half a dozen homes that are directly impacted on those roadworks. And, you know, I'm just wondering, from the complaints that I've received, they have probably been elevated as a result of a lot of frustration after hours trying to contact the council and raise awareness to some of the things that some of these residents have been going through. And I notice that we do have a communication plan with the landowners and wider community, but I just wonder whether or not for those houses that we know are going to be more affected, those half a dozen houses, I just wonder whether or not we could maybe provide them with a phone number that they could contact us 24/7, where they would get more of an immediate response. Because the problems that I've dealt with really relate to the frustration of people not being able to contact the council after hours. And I'm talking about people that, you know, haven't been able to sleep for a couple of days and need something from the council, some sort of feedback. So if I could just make that comment. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Director Bright, can you provide some advice on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the contractor themselves would have an after-hours call service, so what I'll do is I'll liaise with Tor after this meeting, get back to council in relation to what that contact number is and what the details are. And as Tor has already mentioned, we'll catch up and raise the profile of this issue. Mr. Bozich from the City of Canning has been working pretty closely with Metronet in relation to this issue, and obviously there's a well, from our perspective, the traffic management planning needs to be improved and elevated, and it seems like there is an acceptance on behalf of the New West Alliance. And
to be clear as well, Director, I think that I want to be clear and just say, look, 99% of Canning Vale is largely unaffected. It's just, you know, half a dozen houses, 6 or 7 houses that from time to time are going to be right on the impact zone of the works that are carried out over 2 or 3 days. It's just those people. That's what I'm trying to get. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
No problem at all. Anyone else? Councillor Barry and then the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, in relation to the officer's recommendation, I speak in favour of it also, but just a question, 2 questions in relation to 6 when it says disturbance and management of contaminated material. The fact of the matter is we all know it's a tip there, so if there is going to be disturbance of that soil, what do you know if or not, how will that be treated? Will it be taken off-site, or will it be
Director
just
Bride.
taken over to the back?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. Certainly, this particular development application has been referred to the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, the Contaminated Sites Branch. So they'll be providing a more detailed response in relation to this issue, but there was a site management plan prepared in relation to how they'll deal with the contamination. We've got a condition on here which we're suggesting goes on in relation to when their earthworks planning is done and their construction management plan, that they identify how they're going to deal with the contaminated waste. Obviously, from a car park perspective, they're going to be putting, there's going to be no cutting into the land, they're filling and then cascading the car park down, so there's no actual, incursion into that layer. And certainly with the drainage, that's a sealed and piped system, so there'll be no drainage into the actual landfill itself. So it's an issue that will be addressed, and DWER, the Contaminated Sites Branch, will be particularly responding to that issue.
Councillor Barry?
Yeah, and in 9D, the import of certified weed and, is it phytophoria free soil? When that comes in, I mean, is that certified, and how will we know?
Director Bright?
Given there's a lot of bushland around there.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, that was also one of the requirements of the environmental approval, and that's why we've put it in the advice notes. But certainly it's one of their requirements, the environmental approval requirements. They must bring in certified clean fill, so that there's a process which they have to go through to make sure that that fill is not contaminated.
Thank you for that answer. And last but not least, like I said, I speak in favour of it. There is a number of conditions, and I'm more than aware that really this is really just a courtesy call from the government, but I certainly hope all those conditions that the officers have worked on so diligently will be given due consideration. Thank you.
Your comment is noted. Thank you very much, Councillor Barry. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, considering that this is, to echo the points just made by the previous councillor, Councillor Barry, it's basically a courtesy call by WAPC. But that's good because we can add in our conditions. I think it's an exciting project finally coming to an underdeveloped area of the city, definitely in regard to public transport. I just hope that I'm confident that it'll be a good project, but I think architectural appeal is important, trying to future-proof the project as best one can, which includes capacity, includes, not just planning for now, but for 20, 30 years. That includes lifts and escalators. And just quickly, electric car charging facilitation. I know that ChargeFox, if you want to have a look at ChargeFox in Armidale and Forestfield McDonald's, they have, you bring your own cable, you plug in, you charge per kilowatt hour, and it's restricted, so you can't just stay overnight and camp there. I just think, yes, I'm excited by the project. The reason I just say those 2 points is to give you guys some guidance. Whatever you do is up to you. But yeah, I'm excited by the project, Mr Mayor, and look forward to us all going down there and being invited to the opening ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Does anyone wish to speak against the matter before we put it to the vote? Councillors, let's put the matter to the vote.
Item SD 004-21 is carried unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you. The matter has been endorsed and carried unanimously. Thank you, Council. We move on to the final item in tonight's agenda. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming along tonight, and good night. We move on to SD 005 of 21. The title of that report is Recommendation to the Western Australian Planning Commission on the proposed State Football Centre at 305 Welshpool Road, in brackets lot 501 and 343 Wall Street, close brackets lot 22, Queen's Park. The officer's recommendation is partially on the screen and similar to the last item, has significant conditions attached which run for a number of pages. The recommendation can be found on page 40 of tonight's agenda. Can I have a mover I've got a very excited Deputy Mayor there. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And a seconder will be his co-ward councillor, Councillor Barry. Similarly excited, thank you. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yes, I'll keep my comments very brief. Again, this is the same sort of architecture as the last motion, where basically it's a courtesy call by West Australian Planning Commission. Excited to have the project. We can't really take too much credit for it, but we're happy that they're coming to Canning and investing in a really exciting project that will re-energise an area. And we've already had lots of people ringing up saying, oh, we want to come down and play football. So it's good for the sport, good for the area. I know currently it's a bit of a test site for 4x4s. If you go to the dealer, they'll take you down there and do a bit of a drive and they test out the traction. So I think this would be a better use of that than previous uses. So that's all, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Barry. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Barry.
Yes, I'll keep it short. Yes, once again, all those conditions the city is envisaging will be adhered to. I wish you luck for yourself and for the community, because I think, like the Deputy Mayor just said in the previous one, this is a largely underdeveloped piece of land. I mean, nothing's happened there for years. I mean, nothing since, I think in the 60s they were slaughtering horses out there, and that was about the last great thing of note out there. So the fact of the matter is that it's underdeveloped. There's a lot of money, and I wish it well, and I speak in favour of it.
Thank you. I'll only make a comment. I support it. Deputy Mayor said something which I'll pick up on, that he, won't be taking credit for it. I think you should. I think the whole council should be immensely proud that we and the executive have been strongly supportive of this incredibly strong and fine project since it was first presented to us. So I think, Deputy Mayor, you should and we should really take some credit for it, and particularly our administration. So I'm really proud of it. It's a wonderful night, I think. Deputy Mayor, that's all I've got to say. Sorry. Former Deputy Mayor, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not old enough to remember that there was a slaughterhouse down there, but it was a first-hand information there. I agree with you, Deputy Mayor, and Mr. Mayor. I think we should be immensely proud of this. This is a great thing. This is a really good thing. This was, like you said, Councillor Barry, it was a nothing area. We've got this, and there was a lot of work has been done. We've had briefings on this before. We had the state government out here before. So I can understand what you're saying, that's sort of a rubber stamp, but we were involved in this to a huge degree. It wouldn't have gone ahead without the City of Canning's assistance and without the administration doing a lot of work with it. So yeah, I think we can take a lot of credit, and I think this is a great thing for the City of Canning to have the state football centre down there. Soccer is one of the biggest expanding sports around. It's overtaken in junior, overtaken netball now, which was the biggest participatory sport in Australia, which is no longer soccer is. So I think it's a great thing. So yeah, good stuff.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Yes, Councillor Sabiri.
I support the Office's recommendation. They've put a lot of work into it, obviously, as you can see, and I hope these recommendations are more than just a courtesy call, because we're a pretty big stakeholder. I have questions around, especially around the plans that we have, I guess. There's, and I gotta find it, the recommendations. If we have a look at the plan in the large attachments, it'll probably be page 147. It refers to, I guess, a fencing or a footpath, and I was wondering if this, the city's taken into consideration the decision of the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment, and on the effect of this plan.
Director Bride, can I ask you just to, sorry. Is it Director Bowe?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Director Bride.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly the condition that we've put on in relation to the fencing and the vegetation protection, there is a construction and environment management plan, condition 2. that requires details in relation to protecting those vegetation protection areas. And there's also a condition 7 around the landscaping and revegetation plan. So that particular plan that was referenced by Councillor Sabiri is an excerpt from the landscape master plan, very high level concept. Certainly both the Department of Water and Regulation and the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions have been given this application to comment on. Obviously they're the environmental agencies with the expertise in that area. But certainly there's a requirement for a detailed landscape plan and a detailed environmental management plan, which will ensure there's, I guess, uniformity in relation to those environmental issues.
Councillor Sabiri?
One more. On the same plan and the large attachments, we have, I guess, an emergency access route. Historically, people have dumped rubbish in this area, and I guess there's been a bit of a concern raised about, do we actually require it? Do we actually need that access route? And how will it be controlled? Will it be open? And yeah, if we could get more information about that. Thank you.
Director Bright, are you able to provide any oversight on that comment by Councillor Sabiri?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Certainly the main access for this development is off Welshpool Road. There is an access point shown off Gibbs Street, which is only identified for emergency vehicles and delivery vehicles. So that will be a controlled access. There'd be some sort of physical barrier, which we'll have to work through with the applicant. But certainly that's not going to be open and usable by the general public. It's going to be blocked off and only utilised for those particular vehicle types. In terms of deliveries, there is a delivery management plan that's requested as a condition of approval. So that's something they'll have to articulate in a lot more detail before the building permit application comes in.
Thank you. Councillor Sabiri?
Thank you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Councillor Ponaturo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This particular, I'm talking about the public artwork. This particular item and the previous item, especially in this area, would the artwork reflect on people or the demographic of people who live, or what happens in just not only Queen's Park and Canning? So also I would like to see more of the local artists getting the opportunity to do the artwork as well. I know it may not be in our control, but if we can encourage that to happen, it'll be really good, because it's got a lot of fairly good migrant communities there. As I think Councillor Holland said, yes, mostly the migrant communities plays more soccer than the AFL game, so which is really good. And of course we have Friends of Queen's Park, the bushland is there. So can we somehow encourage, give them the ideas, whomever's getting the award will be awarded, can they reflect what happens in that area and Canning? And it'll be really good to see we have some local artists doing the work as well, this item and previous item as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Your comments are noted. Thank you very much for making them. Yeah, I agree. Has anybody else got a question to ask? Councillor Kunza?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just Director Brad, with respect to point 20, condition 21, the number of events attracting between 2,000 and 4,000 shall be limited to no more than 5 in any calendar year. Obviously, some other areas have encountered issues or controversy when they've had stadium infrastructure built, and then there's that fine line between balancing using the infrastructure and dealing with the congestion in the area. Why, before like the operational management plan and that's been developed, have we limited to 5? And what would be the process once this is built, if in, say, 5 or so years they actually want to hold a tournament and they want to actually have a number of events there, or there's actually a good reason to have, like, what's the process?
Director Bryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. That was certainly the balance issue in terms of what they provided to us from their existing experience with their existing facilities. There shouldn't be a situation in relation to their games that they'll exceed 2,000. The only one on the radar is the training facility for the Women's World Cup shortly after opening, which may attract around 4,000. That's just so certainly we've catered for their games and some growth in those games. We felt that in talking to them about the number of events, that around a cap of 5 would be reasonable at this stage. They have got no ideas in relation to what those 5 will be at this stage, but they wanted a bit of flexibility. And we thought from a resident perspective, at this stage, knowing that there's an upper limit on those really large events would be reasonable. It gives some certainty to the community. So in terms of that condition in the future, if it works out from a business perspective that they are looking at a larger number of events, they can always come back to the West Australian Planning Commission, same process. They'll look for an amendment, and that has actually just happened with the West Coast Eagles Lathlane facility. There was a set cap. They operated the facility. They were able to use data to show that they were managing the impacts, and then they came back and looked at a less restrictive condition. So given we don't really have too much detail from Football West, and they don't, to be honest, particularly know what additional events they're looking at this stage, we thought that was a good balance at this stage to come forward with. There is the other condition there which talks about if they're able to, there is an option to develop a site or an event-specific event management plan. If they can prove that they can manage the impacts, then it's open for a variation at that point as well. So we believe there's some flexibility in there for Football West, but essentially down the track, if they believe that there's some extra events that they would like to have, they can always come back to the Commission through this process and seek an amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question. When does the city expect that the feedback accumulated from the community consultation will be brought to council? Thank you.
Director.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. This is the first, well, I think it's the second particular proposal that's gone through the State Development Assessment Unit. That was a unit that was established only a few months back. Anything over $20 million, which is of state significance, doesn't go through the normal JDAP. So it goes direct to the Department of Planning. And in terms of the way they, treat the City of Canning, they treat the City of Canning as any other stakeholder. So the community, the City of Canning, all the state government agencies will provide their input to the Department of Planning's State Development Assessment Unit. The close of that is 5 p.m. Today. So we've got no line of sight to what the community are feeding back to the State Development Assessment Unit. They will prepare a report and we'll get an opportunity, and certainly we can share that with councillors, so they'll prepare a report for the West Australian Planning Commission. It's looking like that report will go to the Commission in early March. So I can certainly circulate that to councillors, and there's also an opportunity to do a deputation for this item and the Ranford Road train station. The Ranford Road train station item is going up on the 17th of February. So there's an opportunity for council to have a look at the report, look at how they're treating it, our conditions, and if there is a difference in what we've requested to what's been put there, there's still an opportunity to do a deputation. But certainly when those reports are available, we can circulate those to council.
Thank you. Unless there's somebody wishing to speak against the matter, it seems that we're, the sentiment is that this will need to go to the vote. Thank you, Governors. We'll put the matter to the vote.
Motion SD 005-21 is passed unanimously, 11 in favour.
Thank you, Governance. We'll move on to item 7, which is confidential items. There are none, and a closure at item 8. Councillors, there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed now at 7:13 p.m. and thank everyone for their attendance. Councillors, can I ask you please just to stay in your seats for a few minutes? Once the public is cleared, Mr. Stephen Kane just wants to introduce himself.